In today's episode, we'll continue the Ramayana with Hanuman's journey to the center of the earth to rescue Ram and Laxman. It includes a showdown with his own son and a showdown with the Lord of the Underworld, Mahiravana, a.k.a. Ahiravana. Namaskar and welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast that will take you on a journey through the rich mythology, folklore, and history of the Indian subcontinent. I am Narad Muni, the celestial storyteller and the original Time Lord. With my ability to travel through space and time, I can bring you fascinating stories from the past, the present, and the future. From the epic tales of the Mahabharata and Ramayana to the folk tales of the Panchatantra, to stories of Akbar Birbal and Tenali Raman, I have a story for every occasion. The purpose of the stories is neither to pass judgment nor to indoctrinate. My goal is only to share these stories with people who may not have heard them before, and to make them more entertaining for those who have. We are back to the Ramayana in this episode. The Ramayana is one of two major epics in Indian mythology. The saga began in the kingdom of Ayodhya with Crown Prince Ram, who was actually an avatar of Vishnu. Vishnu is the preserver of the universe in the Holy Trinity, together with Brahma, its creator, and Shiva, its destroyer. But when Ram was on the cusp of becoming the king, his stepmother upset everything by forcing him into exile for 14 years. Ram went into the forest with his wife Sita and brother Laxman. The forest was a dangerous place, but the Ayodhya trio brushed aside all challenges until Ravan showed up. Ravan was the 10-headed demon king of Lanka and the mega villain of this epic. Ravan had acquired so many superpowers that defeating him was virtually impossible. He directed one of his minions to create a diversion while he abducted Sita. In the absence of any police force, CBI, or Gumshida Talash Kendra, Ram and Laxman sought help from the next best option, the Vanars. The Vanars were a kingdom of monkeys led by their king Sugriv. Hanuman was Sugriv's advisor and right-hand Vanar, and he provided most of that actual help. Hanuman flew across the ocean and found Sita in Lanka. He burnt down most of Lanka, but he couldn't persuade Sita to return with him. She wanted Ram to come himself and to rub Ravan's 10 noses into the ground. That's what Ram did. First, though, the Vanars helped by building a bridge across the ocean to Lanka. Ravan's brother, Vibhishan, also switched sides and teamed up with Ram and the Vanars. The war began, and Ram, Laxman, and the Vanars were quickly decimating Ravan's army. Despite a couple of major setbacks that brought the Ayodhya brothers to the brink of death. But they survived, thanks to timely intervention from Garud and then Hanuman's pharmacy trip all the way to the Himalayas and back. We'll continue the story at this point at Ravan's palace. This palace was oddly empty. There was no one to even light the lamps, even though it was getting quite dark. All the doom and gloom was justified considering Ravan was on a sticky wicket. It was not an option to send in a night watchman to buy himself some time to think through his strategy. He was down to his last wicket. The worst part was that there was no possible fairy tale ending for Ravan. Even if he entered the Maidan himself and scored some big hits, this was not a battle he could win. This wasn't a T20. This was just the first day of a very long test match. And even if by a miracle he managed to defeat everyone, he had no family left to come back to. Family. Come to think of it, he did have one family member left. And then inspiration came to him. If he couldn't win on the battlefield, he could beat the Vanars off of it. A sneak attack in the middle of the night. And he knew just the Underworld Don who could pull it off. His brother, Mahiravana, also known as Ahiravana. Ahiravana was literally the lord of the underworld, Patal as it was called. Ravan dispatched a messenger to his brother. The messenger was a mole, naturally, because of all the digging involved in getting to Patal. But while Ravan was dispatching one mole down a hole in the ground, he didn't notice the other mole at the keyhole who was watching all this. This second mole wasn't a literal mole, but a disgruntled Lankan who had turned spy for Vibhishan. There was low morale in the palace, from the evil mega-villain boss who tortured everyone around him to seeing all your friends and family slain on the battlefield. That was enough to motivate a few people to switch sides when they saw how the tide was turning. Not openly, because Ravan was still a lot scarier to them than the Vanar army. Just secretly. This spy dashed away to the Vanar camp. She had to show her identification papers and the dozen secret passwords that Vibhishan had set up with her. But eventually, she got an audience with Vibhishan himself. Quickly, she informed him that Ravan had sent for Ahiravana. He rewarded her and sent her back to spy some more. Vibhishan understood the importance of this news. Ahiravana was going to be a big problem. Most folks in the Vanar camp were sleeping at this time, but this news was important and urgent enough to warrant an emergency meeting of the War Council. 15 minutes later, all the members of the War Council gathered, but most were not happy with the disturbance. Jambavan the bear was the first to speak.
This better be good. I had just begun my hibernation.
Bear with me one moment, Vibhishan responded. We are facing perhaps the greatest threat of all. Sugriv yawned. We know we have Ravan to deal with, but that's a tomorrow problem. But Vibhishan clarified that he was talking about a tonight problem. And the clear and present danger was not Ravan, but Ahiravana, also called Chota Ravan, the Underworld Don. Ravan had called him in, and Vibhishan was ready to bet that right now Ahiravana was plotting to abduct Ram and Laxman. Laxman wasn't impressed.
But we took care of Kumbhakarna, Indrajit, and many other generals. There are too many to name. What makes Ahiravana special?
In a word, physics, Vibhishan said. What makes Patal different from here is physics. Patal is deep in the earth. It's a very high pressure environment. And you'd feel the heat too. Sounds just like Ravan's palace tonight, Sugriv said, and immediately laughed at his own joke. What that means, Vibhishan ignored him and continued, is that if Ahiravan comes up to the surface, he brings a little bit of the underworld physics with him. Chemistry too. He can bring up toxic gases and lava. He can literally make your floor lava. That convinced everyone that they had to act. It was also obvious that Ram and Laxman needed rest if they were to take on Ravan in the battlefield tomorrow. So, they needed to sleep. The natural choice for a guardian was Hanuman. Hanuman was thrilled with that responsibility, but he wouldn't be content with simply guarding the tent that the brothers slept in. He would be the tent for them. Instantly, his tail grew an enormous length. It kept growing, and then it immediately organized itself into a conical shape. Now, not even a fly could get in without Hanuman knowing about it. Alert and ready, he stood there scanning every direction while Ram and Laxman slept inside. Not long after, Vibhishan arrived. There's one more thing I want to tell Ram and Laxman, and you too, he cautioned the Vanar. Ahiravan is a tricky guy.
So, watch out for his monkey business, eh?
Hanuman asked. Exactly, confirmed Vibhishan. He is also a master of disguise. He could show up here as Bharat or Dasharath or even Sita just to get past you.
Not to worry, Vibhishan. I'm not so easily fooled,
Hanuman asserted. Relief spread across Vibhishan's face. I had better go warn Ram and Laxman as well, he said. Hanuman moved the coils of his tail and let Vibhishan in. Not 5 minutes later, Vibhishan appeared, but not from inside Hanuman's coils. He appeared from the outside. Say, Hanuman, I remembered one more thing. I wanted to caution you and Ram and Laxman. This Ahiravan guy, he has a whole bag of tricks up his sleeve. But Hanuman had already figured out what had happened. The wrong brother of Ravan had gotten past him.
That he's a master of disguise? He can impersonate Bharat, Dasharath, or even Sita?
Hanuman asked, even though he already knew what the answer would be. Vibhishan's answer was surprise. Hanuman had anticipated his exact words. The Vanar rapidly uncoiled his tail and returned it to normal size. And looking at where Ram and Laxman had been sleeping, he saw exactly what he had feared. There was no Ram, no Laxman, no fake Vibhishan. There was only a hole in the ground, probably leading straight to Patal Lok.
I must go after them. Go warn the others,
Hanuman told Vibhishan and dived into the hole. The lack of a struggle during the abduction didn't really bother Hanuman. Of course, he knew that Ram and Laxman could have easily overpowered Ahiravan if they had been awake. But he reasoned that Ahiravan must have brought some sleeping gas from the underground to keep them out of the action. Hanuman could zoom faster than any speed Ahiravan could have managed. And yet, Ahiravan had a head start. So when Hanuman got to the end of the tunnel and at the gates to Patal, Ahiravan was already on the other side of it. First, Hanuman had to get past this giant of a guard at the entrance. And the closer he looked, the more the guard seemed like a monstrosity. He seemed part crocodile, part monkey. Hanuman decided to approach with tact.
Genetic experimentation gone wrong?
He asked the creature. Oh, hey, Dad. I didn't see you there, the creature replied. This bothered Hanuman. He was a bachelor, a celibate by choice. He couldn't have a child. Or maybe it was just the way people addressed each other down here in the underworld. But no, the creature clarified. His name was Makardhwaj, and he explained that Hanuman was in fact his father. You see, a few weeks ago, when Hanuman was flying over the ocean, a lady crocodile had been swimming right under him. She looked up at the flying monkey, and for her, it was love at first sight. And that's how I was born, he explained. Hanuman paused and then said,
You're just a few weeks old, and yet you seem all grown up and mature. But it seems to me you missed an important lesson about the birds and the bees. It usually takes two to...
Makardhwaj interrupted. I know all that, but you see, Mummy has this special power that she can give birth to anyone she likes. She just needs to think about whom she wants a child with, and boom, their DNA suddenly gets teleported into her child. That made some sense. Kunti would later have a similar superpower in the Mahabharata too. Now that those introductions were out of the way, Hanuman asked his son to get out of the way too. But Makardhwaj flat out refused. He was going to do his duty.
You're not a chimp of the old block, I guess, Hanuman said. You're working for the bad guys, and I'm supporting the good guys here.
Makardhwaj responded that his employers may be evil, but they paid him a salary. Could Hanuman imagine anyone up there on the surface wanting to hire Makardhwaj? Reluctantly, Hanuman had to agree. It would be a PR disaster anywhere that wasn't ruled by a demon king. But now the problem was getting past this guy. Hanuman didn't want to hurt his son too much. Being a crocodile-monkey hybrid was hard enough, without also damaging his ego. So Hanuman threw up his hands, as if in despair.
All right, I can see you're the perfect guard. It would be impossible to get past you. I'll just head home now.
He walked away, while Makardhwaj celebrated what he thought was his victory. But just as he rounded the corner, Hanuman used his superpower, which allowed him to change size. He transformed himself so that he was barely visible, and quickly flew past Makardhwaj and through the keyhole. The guard didn't even notice. Once past the guard, Hanuman zoomed through all the buildings and quickly located the dungeons. Ram and Laxman were there, still unharmed. But it wouldn't remain that way for long. He saw that people were preparing for a big sacrifice in their temple. It was obvious from the conversations he overheard about the two princes from the surface that Ram and Laxman were going to be killed in a few hours. Hanuman headed for the archives building. This wasn't the time for light reading, but he needed to pore over the government records to find a way to defeat Ahiravan. It would not be sufficient to break Ram and Laxman out of prison. He also needed to defeat this Underworld Don to end this threat forever. And any intelligence he could gather on Chota Ravan would prove valuable. It proved immensely valuable. It turned out that Ahiravan could only be killed by a person who performed a nearly impossible task. There was a room near the temple with 5 lamps that always burned. Only a person who could extinguish all 5 lamps at exactly the same time could kill Ahiravan. The lamps had to be extinguished by blowing at the flame. He couldn't use other artificial ways like flooding the room or cutting off the oxygen. He couldn't move the lamps. Obviously, the lamps were spread out across the room and had some built-in protections to prevent being extinguished accidentally. This was too elaborate, but not very intelligent, thought Hanuman. If Ahiravan really wanted to make this impossible, why didn't he just keep one of the lamps at Ravan's palace or anywhere miles away instead of keeping them all in the same room? The flawed logic didn't stop there. In a recent cost-cutting measure, they had cut guard duty outside this temple of the 5 flames. Makardhwaj was considered sufficient. Besides, no one had attempted to even enter the temple of the 5 flames before. Hanuman went straight to that temple. He looked around and realized that it was a difficult task indeed. There was no position he could be in to simultaneously extinguish all 5 flames. It was a difficult task, but not impossible. Hanuman twisted his neck and suddenly 4 more heads sprung up. All 5 mouths breathed out and extinguished the 5 flames at exactly the same moment. See? It hadn't been so difficult after all. All it took was a little intelligence, confirming yet again that knowledge is power. The next step was Ahiravan. Hanuman went straight to the sacrificial temple, where Ahiravan had just given the order to fetch the prisoners from the dungeon. It was now or never. Hanuman suddenly grew massive in size. The residents of Patal were not surprised. A supersized 5-headed monkey didn't seem all that out of place in a land guarded by a crocodile monkey and where moles were messengers. Ahiravan had been warned about Hanuman. Ravan had told him all about this monkey that had burned down most of Lanka. Ahiravan was prepared. Or at least, he thought he was. He aimed chunks of boiling hot lava at Hanuman, but they bounced off harmlessly.
I got this superpower from Agni. The heat doesn't really bother me,
he explained.
Stop chattering, monkey, and start fighting,
Ahiravan said, through gritted teeth. He landed several blows with his club on Hanuman's chest. Hanuman merely yawned.
Was that it? You're done? Well, then allow me to retort.
He snatched away Ahiravan's club and crumpled it as if it were made of paper. Then he did exactly the same thing to Ahiravan. The citizens of Patal were too stunned to say anything, but they had brought up Ram and Laxman from the dungeons. So Hanuman thought this was absolutely the right time for the three of them to exit. Besides, it was almost dawn at the surface. The next day of battle was before them. He carried Ram and Laxman and sped through one of the numerous tunnels and back to the surface. Ram and Laxman woke up. Ahiravan's sleeping gas had actually a very positive effect. They were refreshed and recharged and ready for battle with Ravan. We'll see what happens in the final showdown between Ram and Ravan, but that is for a future episode. That's it for this time. A few notes. Previous Ramayana episodes are linked in the show notes and on the site sfipodcast.com. Check them out. There are a few different variations of the story today. There's one that involves Vishnu's Sudarshan Chakra guarding the top of Hanuman's tail tent. There's another version which tells of Hanuman not only killing Ahiravan but also killing everyone in Patal. But that is clearly not accurate. Hanuman is not bloodthirsty and not the type to go on a Rambo or even Godzilla-style rampage. Hanuman did fight and defeat Makardhwaj in many versions. What I related today is just my interpretation, but it's based on several conversations with Hanuman over afternoon tea over the centuries. I didn't ask him outright, but I have inferred all this from some hints that he dropped. Today's story also explains why Hanuman is sometimes depicted with 5 heads, the Panchamukha version of Hanuman. Another bit to consider here is how Hanuman's adventure may have been part of the canon that inspired Joseph Campbell's theory about the hero's journey. Something that is seen in Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, The Wizard of Oz, and countless other stories. It begins with the hero, Hanuman, getting a call to adventure. Vibhishan ringing alarm bells about the Underworld Don, Chota Ravan. That is followed by some initial reluctance, perhaps because the Vanar War Council underestimated Ahiravan. Then, a supernatural wonder, being confronted by Ahiravan's tactics that weren't quite mainstream. A threshold guardian in the form of Vibhishan's advice. A setback with Ram and Laxman getting abducted. The transformation, rising to the challenge of the flames and developing 5 heads in response. And then, atonement for his earlier mistake by defeating Ahiravan. Being such a huge devotee of Ram, rescuing him and his brother Laxman was the reward. That's all for this time. In the next episode, we'll continue Chandrakanta with more cat and mouse games between Tej Singh and Shivdat's evil IRs. Thank you all for the comments on social media and on Spotify's Q&A. I can't directly reply to the questions there, but I'll address them here on this show. Teja or Aditya, Adi, Kyra, thank you for your support. Kyra, I hope you don't have to wait too long. I do plan to cover Anasuya's follow-up story very soon. Abir, yes, we will get back to the Mahabharata soon. I do have a few other episodes lined up first. And correct, Sushen certainly contributed in healing Laxman. There are many Sushens in Indian history and mythology. Even in the Ramayana, there are 2. One of the Vanar generals was Sushen, but the chief medical officer in the Lankan army was also called Sushen. Abhinav, sure, I've added that to my list and will get to it, hopefully soon. Chatterbox, you're getting your wish. Chandrakanta is coming up next week. If you have any other comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories you'd like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or reply to the questions on Spotify's Q&A. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. You can listen to the show on all podcast apps, and that now includes YouTube. If you want to send me an email, it's storiesfromindiapodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.